You're listening to Inside the Notes. I'm your host, Erica Block. Here we have the opportunity to listen to the stories that connect our musical family tree. First-hand accounts of performances, musicians, and mentors that shape the way we listen, learn, and teach. On today's episode, we are talking with legendary Hollywood flutist Sheridon Stokes. Sheridon is performing a recital this week with the Bellingham Music Club. Welcome. I'm so excited to dig into all your stories today.
Well, I'm just delighted to be here. Thank you very much.
So let's get started right from the very beginning.
Okay.
I know your father was a clarinetist.
My father was a clarinetist.
Tell us about kind of the beginning of your experience participating in his world.
Well, my father, he came from a family of 7 children. He was the youngest of 7, and my grandmother was a church organist and choir director in Wichita, Kansas. My father lived in Kansas until he was maybe 10 years old or something like that. Everybody in the family had to play an instrument. And so my father played the clarinet. And of the 7 children, he was the only one that became a musician.
Wow.
And he was quite unique, and he was sort of a groundbreaker in a way in the family. Not always that respected, because musicians, as you know, are thought of as being sort of flaky, and they can't really hold a steady job, sort of that sort of thing. Well, my father, being from Kansas, he wasn't like that at all. There's nothing flaky about him.
Right.
He was very, very, very careful about everything he did. And it was not only music, but his finances and taking care of the family. He was like that. That's the kind of guy he was. Anyway, so from the time I was a little kid, I was surrounded by musicians. And I grew up in a mountain cabin until I was 6 up in the Angeles Forest.
Wow.
My father worked all the time as a clarinetist, but he'd have people come and visit us. And so I met musicians from the time I was 3 or 4 years old.
Wow. And so how did you get from that cabin down to Los Angeles?
Oh, he had to move to the city of Burbank because they were going to draft him in the Army. So he got a job working the graveyard shift at Lockheed Air Terminal, just to stay out of the Army.
Wow.
And then one day he took a job and couldn't make it to work. They found out about it, and they sent him to the draft board. But he didn't pass the physical. He had some physical thing like a hernia.
Wow.
So he didn't go in the Army. It was nothing serious. So from then on, he was a musician, and he spent his time as a full-time musician.
Wow. And how did he get to being in charge of the Hollywood Bowl?
Well, he knew people. He was in the WPA orchestra. He'd been first clarinet in the Kansas City Philharmonic.
Wow.
Then he went to the WPA orchestra, Works Project Administration, member under Roosevelt. And then from there he met people, and they wanted a certain orchestra manager to be manager of the Bowl. But this fellow he was orchestra manager at Paramount Pictures, and you can only be manager of one job according to union rules. So he asked my father if my father would be the manager of the Bowl at Stokowski.
Wow.
So that's how that started.
Wow. And what was the kind of the schedule for the Bowl? Was it just seasonal with Stokowski?
It's just in the summer.
Yeah, so it was kind of like a summer
series.
festival
Yeah,
series.
a summer festival. Yeah.
Wow. And so you as a young boy got to go and be around Stokowski.
I was around musicians my whole life.
Wow.
And so, you get a different perspective. You hear music performed very well by the best players. I heard records, and then musicians were in the house all the time.
Right.
I mean, I was just surrounded by it all.
So how did you find the flute?
Well, he thought I shouldn't play the clarinet because it had a reed.
Smart. He's a very smart man.
He said, you'd be better off playing the flute. And I didn't care one way or the other. I thought, all right, And I really liked piano, and I wanted to play jazz piano, which I did later. But I started on the flute.
Wow. And so did he get you hooked up with somebody from the symphony for lessons?
The first guy was a guy named Robert Blade. I think he'd played in the Cincinnati Symphony or something like that. And he was piccolo at Warner Brothers Pictures and in the orchestra. Every studio in Hollywood had a contract orchestra. It was a place people from all over the country wanted to come to because there was a lot of work. A lot of musicians were employed. So I studied with him for a while, and then I went to study with Roger Stevens, who was piccolo in the LA Philharmonic. I studied with him for a while. And then one day, I was about 12, And I said to my father, I'd like to get a vibrato, but Roger Stevens can't teach me. And he said, it's just natural. I said, but I can't do it. But there was this guy in town that taught vibrato. He said, well, we'll send you over to this guy. And I went over there, and he had a system for teaching vibrato. So for 6 months, I did nothing but practice vibrato. I was just sort of a focused little kid,
Yeah.
I went to my little orchestra rehearsals there,
Right.
so I played the flute, but I didn't practice anything but vibrato. And I learned it in 6 months, and I went into great depth as to how to control the speed of the vibrato and the pitch variation, which we call the width. So I got really very good at it at a very young age.
Wow. And how old do you think you were? Was that like 12,
I was about
13?
12, 13, something
Okay.
like that. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And so then at that time, it sounds like, were the studio orchestras that were contracted, was it an audition, or was it you had to know somebody and that's how you got into them?
Basically, you had to know somebody.
Okay. So
They
it was
rarely auditioned.
pretty much
anybody,
locked it down, and then you get kind of brought in.
Yeah, they sort of I was under contract at Fox when I was 20, and they didn't exactly audition me. They had me go to recording sessions and play to see if I fit in, which is a logical way to do. And then the first flute player in the Fox orchestra said, well, come over to the house. So I went over and played a little bit. So it was sort of an audition.
That's a good way.
Yeah.
So from a teen, you did youth orchestra and lessons and all that normal kind of young teenager music
Yeah,
work.
I played in the Burbank Youth Symphony, the Burbank Symphony.
And then how did you find your way to university?
Well, then I was in high school. I won the Coleman Chamber Music audition when I was 15. I had a woodwind trio, flute, clarinet, and oboe. And the clarinetist was a guy named Morton Subotnick. Have you ever heard of him?
Yes.
He became a very famous electronic composer.
Yes.
But he was a wonderful clarinetist. He was quite amazing. And he and I and this other guy named Don Leake, who became a famous dentist of all things.
Wow.
Professor at UCLA and invented all sorts of things.
Wow.
Anyway, the three of us won it. And then the next year I auditioned for the Denver Symphony. I got the job as piccolo.
Wow.
And so I quit high school and I went to Denver and I played in the symphony and I enrolled in the University of Denver.
Wow.
So then
playing in
from
the
there
symphony.
I quit because I didn't want to play in a symphony anymore. And I went to USC and I went on the road with Ema Sumac
Wow.
for a couple of months while I was just, I was quit there for a while and went on the road. And so I had a lot of experience. By
So
the time I was 18 years old,
Absolutely.
I played a lot,
So if you were already in the symphony when you went to USC, you weren't studying flute performance, were you?
No, I was already
You were
a
done.
good flute player.
Right. Exactly. So what were you studying at USC?
Well, I was taking composition lessons.
Wow.
And I was also a pretty good clarinetist, so
Wow.
I needed a scholarship, but I didn't want to play flute in the band, so
Right.
I asked the band director, he said, okay, if I play clarinet. He said, well, you have to play for me. So I auditioned in the clarinet. He said, okay, you can play in the band.
Interesting.
And so I had a scholarship there on clarinet, of all things.
Wow.
And I studied composition. There's some good composition teachers there.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some
So
fantastic
anyway,
ones.
and then after that, I got contracted with Fox. So.
Okay,
So
so
as you can see, the experience, I had a
Yeah.
tremendous amount of experience.
ton.
Because I grew up in that environment.
Right.
People, like they say, well, if you tell me you're a musician, well, what else do you do? I said, what else do I do? I don't have time to do anything else.
Right. It's a full-time job.
I'm
Just
busy all the time.
absolutely. So to be so young and already doubling and probably tripling, were you playing sax too?
Yeah, played sax.
So how did you approach that? Because I feel like a lot of students now feel like they have to master one thing and then they kind of start getting into the others. But it sounds like the whole thing was just a world for you and you just were in all of it.
The way I look at it, you focus on one thing and do it well. And the thing I did the best was play the flute. But the more you do other things, the better the thing you're focusing on gets.
Right. Right.
I did it when I got out of the Army. I played with the Mills Brothers, a singing group. And I played baritone sax for a couple of weeks.
Wow.
And didn't touch the flute. Just played in a little band, And then I picked up the flute. I started playing, and this huge sound came out of the flute. I said, "Oh my, I'm not breathing properly."
All right.
Because to play the baritone sax,
So
you
big.
really have to support the sound.
All right.
And I didn't do that as much on the flute.
Fascinating.
So that taught me a lesson. You see, I'm pointing out one contributes to the other.
Right. You got to cross train.
The other thing is the embouchure on the flute. You got to be careful. It's not. It has to be pretty firm, and the corners of the mouth have to be firm to control the embouchure. Well, I got a lot of that from playing the sax and the clarinet. See, that came back, and it really helped on the flute.
Yeah.
And also the fingerings. If playing the sax, it's harder to push the keys down, so it helped the fingering. Also, I played a lot of piano. I probably studied piano more than I did anything.
Wow.
And so the keyboard helped my finger technique, finger coordination, and it also helped my sense of pitch.
Yes.
The piano is a tempered scale. It's not perfectly in tune or anything, but at least you get a good relative sense of pitch, what's related to what. And then you can adjust it from there. You make fine-tuning from there. So that the piano helped my sense of pitch a lot.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
I'm just pointing out that things do relate to each other.
Totally. Did you find that you were it was more typical in those bigger settings with the orchestras and the studios that people were doubling and tripling the clarinet, flute?
Well, you had both.
That woodwind family.
You had both.
Okay.
I was in the Fox Orchestra. They had the key players. The first flute and the first oboe and the first bassoon were, just typical classically trained instrumentalists.
Right.
The first clarinet wasn't. He was a lead alto sax player and first clarinet. He was a wonderful player. So in that woodwind section, we had classically trained and jazz players. So we had a complete jazz woodwind section plus a classical section. That's the way they did it because they had to write for all sorts of things in the movies. Right. So it had to, lots of times they have a jazz band. Another time it would be like a typical classical symphony score.
Wow. So
you had somebody like Franz Waxman, for instance,
Right. So how does it work? Does the composer of the show or the movie bring in the score, they outfit what they need, and off it goes? I feel like a TV series would be different than a film.
The what?
A TV series might be different than a film because the TV series could require different things depending on episodes. So were you hired for the whole series, or was it episodic? And you got hired to record each episode?
Well, for TV shows, sometimes it could be either. I did a show called Dynasty. We did that every year for several years. I did another show called Kung Fu where I played a little recorder when David Carradine was, and we did that for maybe 3 or 4 years. I remember that because it was 8 o'clock every Monday morning, and we showed up for that. So that was something I did, on a regular basis. But a lot of the shows I didn't, or sometimes I'd be subbing for somebody else. So it varied. And
so once you were in a studio like Fox, let's say, then did you just have a day's work and they kind of set up movie, show, movie, and it lasted all day, or was it feast or famine? You'd go for specific things.
So I'll go there for a TV show, and the minimum was 3 hours, a 3-hour show. And a movie, for any recording session, minimum was 3 hours. Movie could be all day, it could be 3 hours. Most movies in the old days were several days. Then they shortened it because they kept wanting to save money on the music.
Right. So that was going to be my next question. A more modern movie, how fast would you record that?
It would get faster now. They don't even put the orchestras together in one spot. They stream them. They record each section separately and put it all together.
Wow.
And it sounds like it too. It has no soul, no feel, or anything to it. I don't know if you've gone to any movies recently. It's
very different from...
But it's so strange. It doesn't match the picture. It's very strange to me.
And
they think they're saving money, but they're not really because they reduce the quality of the picture.
Right.
So I don't think the picture makes as much. And you think of some of those old movies, you think of the soundtrack many times.
Absolutely.
And people remember those soundtracks.
Absolutely. Or you can hum a soundtrack and someone will tell you the movie right away.
Yeah, right. So, it's part of, commercially it makes sense, but they don't see it that way. So.
In the golden days, were the composers present often, or were they sending in scores and that was it?
In most cases, they conducted.
Really?
Once in a while they didn't because they couldn't conduct, but they loved it. A composer writes all this music, and he loves to get in front of the orchestra and conduct.
Absolutely. And it's so fun and pertinent for you to get to kind of spend time with the different composers and understand what they're writing and their purpose.
Sometimes I worked with them.
Yeah.
I worked with a number of composers who took things out of my special effects book and put it actually into the score.
Cool.
It was fun. I would show them how to do things. I was at Disney one day, and I just got my my amplifier, and I was able to hook my bass flute electronically, hook it up to the amplifier.
Cool.
So I didn't tell them anything. They'd written bass flute for me at Disney. So I sat there, and it was amplified, and I turned on a little reverb and amplified it just a little bit, so it wasn't obvious. And I played, and the composer was looking and said, "Gee, that really sounds good. What a big sound you're getting." I said, "Yeah, I was putting I've been practicing a lot." You know. Then finally I told him what I did, and he was really impressed.
Yeah.
So every call after that I worked with him, he said, "Bring your amp. I'm going to write for it that way."
Cool.
Well,
That's
that was
really
good for
neat.
him. It was good for me because it was 50% extra.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? Doubling.
But anyway,
That's cool.
that's how those things work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like extended techniques is one of those things that
Yeah, extended techniques,
kinda keeps growing.
improvisation too. I did where the composer has trouble on a picture. I did something with John Barry, and there was some Afghan music. It was called "High Road to Afghanistan" or something like that. And he hadn't written the music, and he was a little embarrassed. He said, "I need some Afghan music." "High Road to China" was the name of the picture. And he said, "I need Afghan music." And he said, "Can you improvise something?" So I had my Baroque flute there.
Cool.
Because it was wood, different sound. And there were a couple of drummers there. Shelly Manne, the famous jazz drummer, and Emil Richards, fantastic percussionist. And we sort of looked at each other and put our heads together. They figured out some rhythm patterns. I figured what I concocted as a Afghan scale.
Right.
And I use those notes and I play around with them, And so John Barry said, "You ready?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm ready." "Are you guys?" "Yeah, we're ready." "Okay." So we did a slow version and a fast version of Afghan music. Of course,
awesome.
None of us knew what it sounded like.
Right.
But neither does anybody else.
Exactly.
Neither did John Barry. So he was just pleased. I said, "You want it again?" He said, "No, that's fine."
Awesome.
So we improvised.
And that's the fun. It's real musicians. Like you're getting the opportunity to stretch out a little bit.
Yeah.
That's wild.
So I've done that a number of times. I did recently, Rush Hour 3.
Yeah.
You know that picture?
Yeah.
I was doing that with Lalo Schifrin. That was just a few years ago. And the director, a guy named Brett Ratner, you ever heard of him?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Brett says he didn't like what Lalo had written on this one cue. It was some little kids taking karate lessons, and it was sword fighting. And so Lalo comes out, I said, "Improvise some Chinese music." I said, "What do you want?" I said, "You know what to do." And I said, "Okay, well."
They're doing karate.
So I just, in my head, I did the same thing as with the Afghan. I came up with a scale, like a pentatonic scale that I thought would work.
Yeah.
And then I tried to think of the Chinese inflections of what I was doing.
It's awesome.
So okay, you ready? And so I did the same thing. I improvised in a Chinese fashion, and bending the notes and changing the pitch where I thought was appropriate. And
that's the
did
cut.
it.
That's
And
what's
I
in
said,
there?
"You want it again?" "No, it's just fine."
Awesome.
But there was a girl in the orchestra who'd grown up in Beijing, a violinist. She said that sounded really authentic.
Wow, that's
And
really
I was
cool.
really pleased.
Yeah.
What do I know,
Well, and it's hard to make up stuff on the spot like
Yeah.
that. Yeah, especially
I was doing Lalo a favor. He was really to put in a spot, so he's putting me on the spot.
Yeah. So that's a really good example. You probably had recorded a lot of the soundtrack already, and so was that in the editing process when they were matching up the music?
No, it was right there at the recording session.
Do they run the film during so that he can be like, no, this isn't
Oh
working?
yeah, you see the film, yeah. I can't watch it when I'm playing,
Right.
Because my back is to it.
Right.
The conductor looks at the picture, and we look at the conductor.
Right.
So our backs are to the picture.
Right, and get it all lined up.
Yeah.
Do you try and do you try and play it like a movement of a work where it's 10 minutes of music and you play up to a certain point, or is it short cuts?
Well, most of them are very short.
Okay.
Most cues are 2 or 3 minutes, less, sometimes longer. In the old days, the cues were a little longer, but no, they're not very long.
And I saw that you did Sound of Music, is that right?
Sound of Music, yeah.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
I bet that was an incredible experience. Were your singers there with you?
Oh, yeah, they're right on stage. Julie Andrews was there, yeah.
That's
Oh,
cool.
yeah. But I did the Oscars 2015,
Wow.
which is 50 years after.
Yeah.
And I was playing first floor in the Oscars, and there were Julie Andrews was there singing stuff from The Sound of Music.
Oh, that's
I
amazing.
thought that's amazing. It's
50
50 years ago we
years.
recorded that.
And here you guys are doing it still.
Yeah.
What's it like doing the Oscars? I feel like the orchestra is under there working so hard, and it's like abrupt cuts, and people's speeches run long, and you got to get started and play over them. And
Oh yeah, you have to be ready for the next piece.
yeah,
Okay, next. And
just go.
a lot of it's pre-recorded, so it wasn't all live.
Interesting. Okay.
And so, but you have to be ready. You have to be very alert to
Right.
what's going on.
Is it usually the same guys they're basically hiring every year to do it, or?
Well, yes and no. There's one guy that a good friend of mine. He's been in Hollywood. Well, he was young. He was probably 20 or so when he came.
Mm-hmm.
Came from Connecticut. He's played of all the Oscars over there. He's probably played 90% of them.
Wow.
He plays saxophone, clarinet, flute, and oboe.
Wow.
And so.
So
I don't
are
know if
those
he does
woodwind
anymore.
books
He's just
all
turned 90
combo?
and he's still working.
Wow. Amazing.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Are those books in the woodwinds usually mixed books, not just straight for like
Depends.
the Oscars?
On the Oscars, they had both.
Mm-hmm.
They had it was Bill Conti who decided he put a straight flute in the flute book, so they just kept it that way.
Interesting.
So the flute book was a non-doubling book,
Mm-hmm.
and then it depended. Generally, it was just the flute, but not always. Sometimes they had, like when we did it in 2015, the flute, oboe, clarinet, and bassoon were non-doubling, and the guys in the back row, they were all the doublers.
Interesting. Wow. And that's such a wide variety of repertoire because you're playing all of the
Yeah, you
Best
never
Picture
know what you're
songs
gonna
and
play,
everything. Yeah. Oh, that's
Yeah,
really
yeah.
cool. So tell me a little bit about how much it's changed over the last 40 plus years being in the studio. Like for new players
Yeah.
wanting to come in, is there any way to get in? Is it the same kind of...
Well, it's a slow process, The one thing that's changed, they don't have the orchestras like they used to. They stream the music. Not always. Sometimes they have an orchestra, but so that part has changed.
And does each company doesn't necessarily have a home orchestra anymore?
No, not anymore at all. It's
Okay.
all just they contract out each job. And I had lunch with one of the flute players. That she's become very successful now. She really works at it. Just no accident for anybody. You have to work at it to just like anything. If you're going to have a company and sell your product, you have to work at it, and you have to do the same thing in the recording business. But she's doing very well, and she plays well. She works at it. We had lunch the other day because a fellow wrote me a flute concerto. He lives in Germany. He just finished it, and so I was talking to her about it. She teaches at Redlands University and does a lot of studio work, but she's an example of somebody who has made it, but she works at it constantly and plays all these little jobs and meets the composers and all that. That's what you have to do.
Right. And it's not like you're being gainfully employed by a studio and then you
No,
just show
not
up
at
anymore.
all. It's just one job at a time, basically.
Interesting.
And for any reason whatsoever, they won't call you the next time.
Right.
Could be they don't like your playing, they don't like your looks, somebody else wants somebody else. It could be any reason.
Right.
You just don't know what it is.
Right. So you're just
And you get so you say, okay.
right. What are you
That's
gonna
the way
do?
it is,
Just
on to the next one.
hit the pavement. Was there a decade where you saw it kind of changing? Did it change before your eyes, or was it super gradual?
Well, it was gradual, yeah. And of course, I was getting older, so I was ready to leave. But up till around, I would say 2000 or so, it was more or less the same. And then they started doing more and more of this recording electronically, or people who do the film score or the movie score in their garage with their computer and their,
Right.
So, and now so much of it's done that way.
Right. And a bit less orchestrally heavy soundtracks anyway. They're trying to bring in more pop songs and modern mainstream music in addition to just
Doing
having
what?
in addition to having an orchestral soundtrack. Now they're bringing in more mainstream pop songs and
Oh, they do that? Yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
a lot more
Yeah,
than
that's
they
pretty
used to.
typical. I never used to go to movies, but I have gone to quite a few lately, and I've noticed that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's a lot more.
Yeah, a lot of
And they're
that,
spending millions of dollars to get the pop song.
Yeah, right. Anything to sell the picture,
How has, so for somebody wanting to play now, playing
Yeah.
in a getting the gig, they get the one job.
Yeah.
Is there a residual setup like there used to be? I feel like
Yeah, they just as long as it's under a union contract.
then you
We fought hard for those contracts. One of the problems is people that come in new don't know what we went through to get those residuals.
Right.
They have no idea.
right.
How we battled the various companies so we get residuals. And, that's partially what I live on is those residuals.
Absolutely.
And I'm very grateful for it. So, but yeah, you still got them.
Well, that's good. I mean, I think that's something that's really specific and unique to studio work.
Right, but if they run off to some other foreign country and record it there, forget it. You don't get any.
Right.
Even
Interesting.
if you went over there to record it, still.
So in addition to all of that, you've played so many recordings. You've been on so much, but you also did a lot with new music and more classical side of the business. How did you get involved in all of that? In the new music side of things, concert style?
Well, I was under Fox for 2 years. And when the studio contracts were up in 1958, they ran for 10 years, the contract orchestras. But in 1958, I was drafted in the Army.
Wow.
I was only 22 years old.
Wow.
And so I got drafted in the Army, and I managed to get over to Germany and play in the 7th Army Symphony. And we toured all over Europe and Italy and Germany. And,
Wow.
which is, if you have to be in the Army, it wasn't bad.
Yeah, it's not too
But
bad.
when I got back to town, I had to start all over again. They weren't too happy to see me come back. So I thought, well, one good way to do it is to play contemporary music, which I liked anyway.
Right.
And having studied a lot of composition, it sort of fit my way of thinking, my way of hearing music. So I started playing the Monday evening concerts, which is a very elite series in Los Angeles, which featured contemporary music.
Neat.
So I played a lot of new pieces, some premieres. Did a West Coast premiere of something by Boulez where he conducted.
Wow.
I was playing a little trio of contemporary piece. I don't remember the piece now. And people like Stravinsky were there. He was sitting in the front row.
Wow.
And somebody overheard him say, gee, I like the way that guy plays.
Cool.
Things like that. I mean, we're in a little elite group,
Wow. What year do you think that was? Like early
that
60s? Or?
That was in the, from about 1961 until 1971, until a 10-year period.
Wow.
Things seem to go in 10-year periods with me.
That's good. You get the whole decade.
Yeah, now I'm in another 10-year period.
So
I'm out of the university. I've retired from UCLA.
wow.
I was there 45 years
Wow.
teaching the flute.
So now you're on a new adventure.
So now I'm doing things like this. I'm coming around and
How fun is
talking
that?
to people and playing.
Doing
whatever I
recitals,
wanna
doing what you
play.
want. Exactly.
I played everything. I just played in a jazz festival up in Mammoth Lakes.
Wow,
A little
cool.
jazz trio with my son-in-law.
That's fun.
I do whatever I
Whatever you
want
want.
right now.
Get to pick.
I'm not tied down to anything.
That's great. And 45 years of teaching, that's a lot of
Yeah.
students and a lot of, just watching the music industry change.
Oh yeah, it definitely changed. And right after I get through here on Thursday night, we have to drive down to Berkeley because one of my former students, is getting married.
Oh, wow.
So
That's fun.
I'm making time for the wedding on Sunday afternoon.
And watching your students grow up, too. It's pretty fun
Yeah,
to
and
see them get out there. And
Yeah, and some of them are very special. And this student was, and there were several at that period of time.
Mm-hmm.
I used to take them out on my sailboat,
Aw,
and they loved it.
I bet they did.
Yeah. And they've all done very well.
That's
I'm very
fabulous.
proud of them. Yeah.
What kind of advice do you have for students, especially the last 10 years, on how to kind of set their mind as they leave school and begin their journey? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the biggest problem I found as a teacher was dealing with the self-esteem of the student.
Mm-hmm.
You have to let them know that they can succeed, they can do well as long as they have a positive attitude. I say it's like a vector in space. It has speed and direction. And as long as you have that direction and you keep moving in a positive way, you'll be fine.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't know how you're going to end up. Nobody can predict that. But if you bog down and get negative and your self-esteem goes down, that's where you're going to have trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Not so much in what you're doing, because you'll figure it out.
It's very true.
You know, in my retirement concert a year and a half ago at UCLA, I put on a big concert, and Lalo Schifrin came and talked.
Cool.
But I had my son get up and give a talk. And I never realized it. What I taught him when he was growing up, he said, my dad always told me, no matter what happens, keep moving in a positive direction.
That's a great quote.
That's what he remembered.
That's a great quote.
Well, that's the same thing I tell my students.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah, I think getting them to believe in themselves, when you go out into the world, you have to just do it.
They interviewed me, the school paper at UCLA interviewed me for the concert, and so I talked about, they interviewed some of my students, I talked about what I did, but they interviewed, and one of my students quoted me, and the quote was, well, my teacher said, whenever I get on stage to play a solo, pretend I'm a politician. Everything I do is right.
Yes. Yes.
In other words, if you make a mistake, it's not a mistake, it's just a different note.
Exactly.
You have to have that attitude when you play.
Yeah,
you have to.
Yep. You got to be able to sell it.
So that's what I teach them.
Yeah, that's great advice.
That comes first. Then I teach them all the techniques and what they have to do and how do you learn to do this, that, and the other thing, you know.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
What do you think about, obviously, the studio world has gotten really challenging as far as having it be a job. The orchestral world has gotten really challenging. Do you have thoughts for students that are really want to be orchestral flutists, but while they're waiting in line for their audition and their big day, what should students be doing? How can they get out there and network?
Well, a number of things you have to do. I mean, one thing is you have to learn how to take an audition. You know,
Ain't that the truth?
not the best players get the jobs.
Right.
The person that plays the best audition gets the job.
Mm-hmm.
They might not be the one that fits into the orchestra that well. They might not even be the best player, or they might be.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they aren't.
Right.
But you have to know how to audition.
Mm-hmm.
You have to figure out what they want. And that's true of anything.
Right.
No matter what kind of job you're trying to get. So I would say that's one bit of advice. It's very competitive, but so what?
Yeah.
So,
The good things are.
My parents always said, start at the top. There's room at the top, you know, the old saying, you know.
Yeah.
You know, I go along with that.
Yeah.
You can get a job. You figure out what they want. You can get it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all in the state
It's
of
very
mind.
competitive.
Get out there and do it.
It didn't used to be. When I was, you know, one reason I got the job in the Denver Symphony, although I did audition for it, and I got it by my audition, but lots of times people didn't. They come to LA and said, do you have any good players here? We need a bassoonist, an oboe player, and oh yeah, well, so-and-so. They might audition, but they get their job by word of mouth.
Right.
Now you got 100 people trying to get the job.
Exactly. Yeah, I was speaking with someone recently,
Yeah.
and he was saying the principal oboist was calling around saying, does anyone have a second? You got somebody you can bring over here and play with me? So, I mean, now 200 people every audition, and oftentimes they don't take anybody.
Yeah.
So-
Of course, the sad part is lots of time behind the scenes, they got somebody in mind they want anyway. So
Right, which is part
the
of, I
audition
guess,
doesn't mean anything. You know.
understanding what they want. And what about some of those John Williams scores?
I did a lot of scores with him. I don't know what the first score was, but he sent me a letter. It was back in the early 70s, like 73. And he said he'd written this flute concerto. I wonder if I'd premiere it for him.
Wow.
So I said, well, I'll try. And so anyway, he'd heard me play with the Glendale Symphony. The Glendale Symphony was a very good orchestra. It was all professional. We used to play at the Music Center.
Mm-hmm.
It was for studio players who wanted a place to play. And so he heard me play there a lot, so he knew who I was. And so I looked around, and so I got Zubin Mehta's father, who conducted the orchestra at UCLA. We got a little orchestra together, and we premiered John's piece at UCLA.
Wow.
So
Incredible.
So anyway, after that, I did a lot of his film scores and all
Absolutely.
that different stuff.
And that's neat that he was attending or participating in that symphony or coming to those concerts to hear you.
Well,
The Glendale Symphony.
He went around and listened to people a lot, and listened to concerts, and then he heard me play there.
That's really neat. And those Monday night new music concerts, who was in charge of putting that together?
A guy named Lawrence Morton.
Lawrence Morton. Was it through a school or was it a society or?
No, it was just him.
Just like a club.
It was called Monday Evenings on the Roof, and then we changed to the Monday evening concerts. It was a very elite little group of players.
Mm-hmm.
That it was the same people that played the Ojai Festival.
Ah, okay.
The Ojai Festival is a pretty well-known festival, and so they were connected. So a lot of people who did Monday evening concerts played the Ojai Festival.
Right. And so then these composers knew this was a great spot to get new music worked
Yeah,
on and
they all worked
premiered.
together,
And
yeah. And so that's
interesting.
sort of how that. But Lawrence was a genius putting this all together. He knew people, he knew music.
Right. That's
He knew who
fantastic.
could do what.
Right. And LA had so many musicians. There's just so many fantastic
Yeah,
players.
It hasn't existed since, I don't know, on that level. It's existed, but since maybe 1972, 74, something like that.
Wow.
Started disintegrating after Lawrence died.
Right.
So
It's hard when the
Yeah.
parent is
Yeah.
gone to
Yeah.
keep it going.
Yeah.
What about some fun, looking back, just bloopers or behind the scenes things of different experiences that you had where it was just a funny thing happened or something that no one would know? I always love in opera all the behind the scenes craziness, and then the curtain rises and everyone watches the performance
Everybody's okay,
and
yeah,
none the
right.
wiser, right?
Magically, everything's
Exactly.
all right. Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts
Well,
or memories
I have
of
to
that?
think for a minute. All sorts of things happen.
Yeah.
All sorts of crap. I don't know what comes to my mind, but we were doing a movie once, and the concertmaster and the assistant concertmaster, who was his wife, who had very expensive violins, because they made a lot of money and they could afford these expensive violins. It was just before a take, and the microphone above them, they were, there's a stand that goes, like at a 45-degree angle,
Yep.
and then a mic hanging from it.
Yep.
That whole thing fell down right between these two Stradivariuses or whatever they were.
Whoa.
Can you imagine?
No, that's crazy. I bet everybody was freaking out. Pause.
So things like that.
Yeah. I
do
feel like
happen, yeah.
I feel like, and I heard you cut yourself. Is that right on something?
Oh yeah, that was at Disney, and I was trying. That was the days when we were hooking our instruments up electronically. So I was showing them how I could put it on an Echoplex, which is a tape repeater, repeats the same thing over and over again, and amplified. But in order to do that, I had to take the cork out of the end of the flute and put a different cork in, which you'll hook a mic onto. Well, I was rushing, and instead of pushing it out with a rod, I did it with my finger, and I hit the edge of the side of the flute, which was
super sharp.
Which was sharp.
Yeah.
And I cut a big gash in my thumb, and blood was gushing out. And the composer was very impatient. He said, "Aren't you ready yet?" I said, "No, just a minute. I got a little problem here."
Maimed.
But the guy next to me, the oboe player, he said, "I got a Band-Aid here." Thank God for him.
Oh, my goodness.
So he gave me a Band-Aid, and I put it over my thumb, and it stopped bleeding.
Oh, wow.
And then I got the cork in, and got the thing hooked up, and I said, "Okay, everything's fine."
We're ready.
I acted real cool. I didn't try to make a big deal out of it. So,
Wow.
okay, we can go.
Wow, crazy. So what was it like at Disney? Were the different kind of houses, Fox, Disney, CBS, were they all very different run, or was the experience at each studio the same?
Studio's different.
They were all different?
Disney was like a family.
Interesting.
If I hired you at Disney, you're part of the family. Whether you liked it or not, you were part of the family,
Right.
So that's the way Disney. I went in there after I got out of the Army. I became solo flute there when I was about 30, something like that, for about 10 years.
Wow.
And then it sort of disintegrated. It just contracted each job out with different orchestra managers. But when I first went there, it was like a family. They had 5 staff composers. We had copyists that had been there for years. Everybody knew everybody.
Wow.
The commissary, even Walt Disney, you could see him walking by the front of the recording stage over to the commissary.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
What kind of scores did you play there? What kind of stuff was it?
Well, Jungle Book was one. The
Really?
original Jungle Book. Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's
We did
awesome.
a lot of TV stuff, some movies. Yeah.
Did they have the Sunday night Disney specials in the 60s and 70s? I feel like in the 80s, when I was little, it was always every Sunday night. They would do a whole
guess
movie.
so,
But
yeah.
that's not really the
Might
kind
have
of
been,
stuff.
Yeah, I don't really remember.
Interesting.
It's a funny thing. You get so busy working, you're really focused on being on the job at a certain point.
Right.
You never see the movie.
Right.
You don't see. You're not part of that end of it.
Right.
You don't even know when it's on TV.
Right. Just
But we
playing
were
it out.
doing, what was it? Close Encounters, I think, over at Warner Brothers. And John Williams had just come back from England where he'd done Star Wars. So my natural question was, how'd you like the movie? Guess what?
He hadn't seen it.
He never saw it.
That's awesome. The most iconic music of all
Right.
time.
And he never saw the movie.
Never saw it.
And so
That's hysterical.
because actually we want music on this scene, this thing, and this scene. We want a main title and an end title, which are usually about the same.
Right.
That's what they want.
Right.
So that's what I wrote.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. And then on to the next.
you never saw the movie.
It's hilarious if you think about it. I mean, it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah, right.
But it's so much work. And, on the end, on the user side, like you said, the music is a huge part of the movie and the marketing. And
yeah.
it's synonymous with your emotional connection to the movie.
course,
So it's funny to think that the musician side of it, they have no idea.
They don't know how important the music is. I mean, it's really, it amazes me because I've been to a number of movies lately. I get a little bored, so I'll go to a movie. And the music doesn't fit the picture. It's not only not very good most of the time, but it doesn't even fit the picture. I thought, how can they do that?
Yeah, I think that too. The great composers, film composers, it's different now than it
Yeah.
was even the last 30 years.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be the same music. They got
Right.
a lot of different style. That's
Right.
not the point. The point is not written for the picture.
Right.
Disney went to the extreme. They would write music in such detail with what we call click tracks you put on your head. But if a bird moved its head this way or did this, the music would actually pick that little
Wow.
moment in time. It
Wow.
was timed that closely.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now nothing's timed to anything. It's
Just-
some elevator music in the background.
Right, right. It's about. It's
Yeah.
fine. Good enough.
Yeah, it's fun.
That's fascinating. So you had a click while you were playing too?
Well, most of the time, I would say 75% of the time, 80%, we use a click track
Wow.
because it's much more efficient. It keeps everybody together.
Right.
Uh,
Wow. Amazing.
mainly in cartoons, you had to use them all the time. And I used to do some of those Hanna-Barbera cartoons. And we'd have a stack of music this thick, and we'd have to record it all in 6 hours
Wow.
and there was a limit for movies and TV, but not for cartoons. They could write as much music as they wanted. It had to be for regular. It was 5 minutes an hour of music we could record. For Hanna-Barbera, it could be 50 minutes in It
Wow.
wouldn't make any difference. So what we'd have to do is we'd just start. And music for those cartoons was rather difficult.
Absolutely.
And so we'd record one, well, we'd rehearse and record. Pretty soon we'd stop rehearsing, record the next one. And the thing that amazed me is at the beginning of the day, we were playing with a click track. And it sounded good to me.
Yeah.
And we did the takes and next take. By the end of the day, after 6 hours of recording with very little rehearsal, the precision we had as an orchestra, it wasn't a big orchestra, maybe 30, something like that, was incredible. I never realized how imprecise we are really until that click track day, when at the end of the day we were so incredibly together because of the click tracks.
Right. It's like basically practicing with your family with a metronome for 6 hours.
Yeah, right. That's exactly what it was.
You get so tight.
And being in your head, it was part of you. You know.
Right. Right. That's fascinating.
It was fascinating.
And such a different style of playing than so often is now. Amazing.
I noticed one thing, I like different kinds of music. I like jazz, but it didn't matter whether it's classical or jazz. One thing you notice in what I consider a sort of mediocre performance is the rhythm isn't very good.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter whether it's jazz or classical.
Mm-hmm.
Your jazz players, rhythmically, they're off somewhere. From my point of view, you have to have a really very solid rhythm that you vary from.
Right.
You can play any style you want. You don't have to be rhythmic at all. But you have to have something to vary from. You have to have a basis for what you're doing. It doesn't matter whether you're playing a Beethoven piano concerto or you're playing some jazz piece,
Mm-hmm.
Take 5 or something. It's still the same.
Yep.
Still the same problem.
Right.
And the same problem also exists in intonation. You hear some of the great people like Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra sings out of tune. Now, wait a minute. Frank Sinatra knew where the pitch was.
Right.
And he varied from it. And he's talking to you. He's doing a lot of other things. The singers that aren't good are the ones that don't know where the pitch is in the first place.
Right.
So they have nothing to gauge to, nothing to tie into. You see what I'm saying?
Yep. It's kind of like just vertigo. There's no floor, no ceiling, and it's just kind of spinning around.
Yeah, and that's frightening.
Yeah, exactly. And it's really hard as the listener to attach to it.
Yeah, and the more you are focused on the pitch when you're playing, the more you're focused on the rhythm,
Mm-hmm.
The better you feel.
Absolutely.
You have a good, like vertigo, like you have a good sense of security.
Right.
When you have to really know where that pitch is, you're listening to the intervals. You're focusing from note to note what the interval is.
Mm-hmm.
If you do that, you have a much better sense of security.
Right.
Than you would otherwise.
Yeah, and an ability to say something because you know your sentence structure and where you're going and where you've been.
Yeah, and you're listening and you're going where you're going. And a lot of people say, well, I had a piano teacher once say, well, you got to be able to read 2 bars ahead. Well, that's important. But you also have to be able to focus on exactly what you're doing at the moment.
Right.
So you should be able to do both, sort of alternate back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
Focus very much on the moment, also seeing ahead.
Mm-hmm.
See what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. And that's why we're busy all day long.
Yeah,
we can't do other jobs.
That's what we have to do all the time, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
it's so much to be responsible for.
Right, exactly, yeah.
One question I love to ask everyone is, I love to talk about the kind of the magic of performance, and I feel like it's that special key ingredient that makes us want to do music for our whole life. And you don't let go of that. When you've heard a performance or you've participated in something that evoked the energy, the goosebumps, all this kinds of stuff. Was there in your career, especially as a younger player, and especially since you were around music as a young child, was there a performer or a concert you were at that really attached to you? Or a record that you wore out, or something that you listened to over and over and really embodied as part of your musical journey?
Yeah, I remember things like that. Yeah.
Is it anyone you can name for us or think
something
about?
Called A Night Piece by Arthur Foote that Julius Becker recorded. It was so beautiful that I always loved listening to that record.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then on my retirement recital at UCLA, I played that piece.
Awesome.
For that reason.
Yes.
And it was the piece and the way he played. I mean, it was just beautiful flute playing. I'm trying to think of something else that...
Yeah, or a performance that you were in where you kind of felt like yourself with the other musicians were completely clicked in and your whole audience was captivated, kind of one of those moments where everything was...
That happens once in a while where just suddenly everything's really in sync.
Yeah.
And you don't know exactly what it is, but you can feel it.
It's different.
I did a piece once at the Monday evening concerts, 2 pieces. This one piece was a cello, piano, and flute. And the cellist was marvelous, so was the pianist. But somehow we were just locked in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't know why, but it was.
Yeah.
Then I did another piece, and it was really very funny. I don't know if you've ever heard of Ingolf Dahl.
Absolutely. We just
Well,
performed at
Ingolf Dahl
Quincy.
and Loris Morton, who was head of the Monday Evening Concert, were sitting backstage. And so John Neufeld, who was a marvelous clarinetist, who became an orchestrator,
Yeah.
we were playing a premiere of a piece by Nettie Simons. And it was flute, clarinet, and string bass.
Cool.
Well, the string bass player was a student at SC. He was very good. So we rehearsed and we rehearsed and we rehearsed. And we got so we could really play this piece. But it really, we knew the piece inside and out. So we got to the performance and we started playing. Bass player got a bar off. But it was a modern piece. So nobody knew the difference. Literally, nobody knew the difference. And the bass player, he was smart enough to keep going. And we were smart enough to keep going. So all three of us played brilliantly. We really played well, all three of us, even though he was a bar off.
Oh, wow.
So we didn't know what the reaction was going to be. Well, it was very, very funny because Ingolf Dahl was backstage just yelling bravo and clapping his hands. He didn't know.
Awesome.
Well, I figured if Ingolf didn't know,
Yeah.
nobody knew.
Exactly. And his stuff is so precise and so intricate and
We played
detailed.
extremely well.
That's fantastic. That's a
And
great
so
lesson.
it was
in
actually a good performance from my point of view.
Absolutely.
It was really a high point of my performing life.
Yeah, and it's a good,
Yeah.
a
I was
good
talking
reminder.
to John about it the other day.
That's great.
And John, our old friend, John he practiced so much he got carpal tunnel syndrome. I guess it was in his left wrist, you know, from the octave key. So he went to the Mayo Clinic and operated, and he was never the same. Couldn't play after that. It was really very sad.
It's a shame.
He went on to become a well-known orchestrator and orchestrated a lot of movies for John Williams.
Absolutely.
He did very well, made a lot of money,
Yeah.
but he couldn't play the clarinet anymore. So what does he do now? He's retired. He's home practicing the flute and the clarinet and playing the piano. He still has to have the instrument keys blocked off somehow
Right,
so he can
plateau
play.
keys,
you know.
yeah. Yep, but I love that the desire is always there, that everybody
He
just
still wants to
keeps,
play, yeah.
just wants to play.
I don't know how you could describe playing. It's Maria Newman, Alfred Newman's youngest child, who was a composer herself. She was saying it's just, it's there. It's like an addiction.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
and
you
that's
can't
it.
stop.
You have no choice.
Exactly.
I mean, you can try to get rid of it, but it won't go away.
Yes,
You
yes,
know? It's an addiction you have,
yes,
but it's a positive addiction, so it's all right.
right. But
so
it's there.
That's the way I would describe music, because I've gone off and haven't played. You know, when I got out of the Army, I didn't touch the flute for 6 months. Yeah, I've been playing it almost every day.
Right.
You know, in the Army, playing symphony concerts in Germany, and then I had to get back to it. You know, I had to earn a living, but I realized I missed it because there was something missing in my life that wasn't there. You know.
And I think that's the most valuable thing we can all take from this
Yeah.
at all the different stages and careers is
Yeah.
you miss it, and it's really important. And I heard someone say, music's going to come out of you one way or another.
Yeah,
It can't stay in. It's going to
Yeah.
come out.
Just
So-
like this interview. I mean, you're interviewing me, and I'm thinking about all sorts of different aspects of music.
Right.
Not
Right.
just the playing part, but
Right.
all the intricacies and what goes into it.
Absolutely.
And that's part of me, whether I like it or not.
And the career as
And
a
I
whole.
like to go off on my sailboat and disappear for a few days, and that's great, But that doesn't take the music away. you
Right.
know. As relaxing as nice as it is,
Right.
see, that music is still there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. This has been fabulous. I've learned so much,
you're
and I'm
welcome.
so grateful for the time.
Well, I want to thank you for reawakening some things in me.
Good. I'm so
Helps me know
glad.
who I am.
Absolutely. That's fabulous. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Inside the Notes. I'm your host, Erica Block. Be sure to check the Inside the Notes Facebook page for details on our next guest.